this game lived up to the expectation that we hoped for. Because when you look at the Bills and when you look at the Vikings, these are two of the best teams, with the Bills being one of the best teams in the AFC and the Vikings being one of the best teams in the NFC. And just to kind of talk about the game a little bit, because I'll have my points about each team and how they're going to move forward after this game. But I'll be honest with you guys. When I was watching this game, at one point, the Bills were up 27-10. I mean, the Bills were running away with this game, and it didn't really seem like the Vikings had an answer offensively. It just, Kirk Cousins in that first half really struggled. And even in parts of the third quarter, the Vikings just couldn't get anything moving consistently. And, when I look back to how this game really kind of transpired in the second half, I would say that Dalvin Cook getting that 80-yard touchdown run really put the Vikings back into it, because then it was only a 10-point game. It was really the first spark that we had seen from the Vikings pretty much the entire day, outside of maybe some early points in the first quarter, or the first half to be more specific. And then to be like, when I look at the Bills specifically, I look back to when they were in the red zone and they were within the 10-yard line and they had an option to get some points for a field goal, extend the lead. They would have been at 30 points at that point had they gone for the field goal, but they decided to go for a touchdown. They tried to go for the kill shot against the Vikings, and the Vikings held up. They were able to intercept it. I believe Patrick Peterson intercepted that pass from Josh Allen, and actually had a decent return after that. And then after that, just the Vikings just kept chipping away bit by bit. And then, just to really kind of focus on, I'd say probably the last couple of minutes of the fourth quarter. I mean, the Vikings, they had an impressive drive to put themselves in a position to, essentially get the game-tying touchdown. Actually, it was the go-ahead touchdown, I should say. I mean, that was the drive where Justin Jefferson arguably had one of the best catches I've ever seen. I think that catch in particular is right alongside with what OBJ did against the Cowboys on Sunday Night Football about 10 years ago. It was an absolutely phenomenal catch. And what Justin Jefferson did, it was a 4th and 18. The circumstances for that play, I think, outrival what OBJ had, because OBJ's touchdown was still, I would say, it wasn't consequential. I mean, it was a touchdown. But, this Justin Jefferson catch where he just snags it out of the defender's hands, it's a 4th and 18. And if they don't convert, the game's over. There's just no other way to say it. And Justin Jefferson comes down with the catch. They extend the drive, and they get to the 1-yard line. And the Bills defense has an amazing goal line stand. Kirk Cousins tries to sneak it in from the 1-yard line. He gets stuffed at the half-yard line. And it looks as if the Bills are going to win this game. But you have to take into account the Bills are on the 1-yard line. And they have to have an easy transition from the center to the quarterback just to be able to get some yards. And Josh Allen fumbles the ball on the snap, and the Vikings recover the ball in the end zone. And then it's 30-27. And then I got to give Josh Allen credit, because to be able to bounce back from that and to get that team within field goal range within 40 seconds was amazing. Because when you have a turnover like that essentially could give the game away, that could derail the entire game. Yet they were able to remain focused and lead a really good drive to get them in the field goal range and tie the game to send the game into overtime. And then the overtime possessions, and the Vikings had a great drive. The Vikings burned a bunch of clock in that overtime possession. I think, if I remember correctly, they burned at least 5-6 minutes, maybe even 6.5 minutes on that drive. And they didn't really give Josh Allen and the Bills offense a lot of time to work with, since the Vikings got a field goal to extend the lead to 33-30. And then Josh Allen, kind of very similar to what he did at the end of the fourth quarter, was able to lead the Bills into position where they were in the red zone. And then Josh Allen forces a pass into, I wouldn't say like double coverage, but it seemed like a very tight window that he was trying to throw to. And Patrick Peterson ends up picking off the pass, and the Vikings leave Buffalo 8-1, which is just absolutely phenomenal at this point, just because, I'll be honest with you guys, I didn't expect it. I really thought that the Bills were going to win this game, especially when Josh Allen was going to be starting in this game, because there was a little bit of concern of whether or not he was actually going to be able to play this game because of his UCL injury in his throwing elbow. But I'll be honest with you, when he stepped out on the field and when he was throwing passes, I didn't see any issue with his ability to be able to complete passes in a consistent manner. He looked fine out there. Granted, he had some turnovers, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit later. But as far as I see it, I thought Josh Allen looked fine, and I thought that he was really going to be the reason why they were going to win that game. But this is where I kind of want to break it off, and I want to focus on each individual team here. So I'm going to start with the Vikings. The Vikings won the game first, so obviously they get the priority here. When I look at the Vikings this year, I've never really been too high on them, even though that they have a really good record. And the reason why is when the Vikings have been tested this year, granted they haven't been much, they have relatively struggled. When it came to the Eagles game, when they played them, I'd say probably a month and a half to 2 months ago, they struggled. And there's no other way to say about that. The Eagles dominated Kirk Cousins, the Vikings offense, and their defense, respectively, quite easily, or I should say relatively easily. And then, this was another test for the Vikings as far as I see it, because, the Bills are a top 5 team in the NFL, or they were a top 5 team going into this game. And even though that the Bills had what I would consider a bad loss against the Jets last week, I was in the mindset that, the Bills would be able to, bounce back from that loss against New York and really give the Vikings a tough battle at home after that loss last week. And the way that game was going, it just seemed like Kirk Cousins and that Vikings offense just could not get anything going consistently. Buffalo's defense has been riddled with injuries this year, but they've been able to really hone in on that next man up mentality. And by and large, they have some decent players in their secondary, despite the fact that they're star players. You can look at Micah Hyde, for example. He's out for the rest of the year. They don't have him at their disposal. And yet, Buffalo's secondary was still able to make some key plays. They were able to intercept Kirk Cousins twice in that game. And yet, when I look at the Vikings this year, one thing that they've been able to do really well this year compared to years past is they know how to finish games. And this game was no exception. For them to come back from 27-10 and essentially win the game in the manner that they did is outright remarkable as far as I'm concerned, because I really didn't expect the Vikings to win this game. I don't even think Kevin really expected them to win this game. I know he's not here, but he'd probably say something in a similar fashion. 27-10, and then to me that Dalvin Cook touchdown really kind of changed the whole momentum, because the Bills in the fourth quarter, this is where you give the Vikings defense a lot of credit. They stepped up. They definitely put the Bills in a position where they just weren't able to execute as effectively compared to the first half, because the Bills were running and gunning in that first half. But the Bills relatively struggled in that fourth quarter, and that's when the Vikings made their move. And that was despite the fact that Justin Jefferson in the second half, in large stretches, was relatively locked down by the Bills secondary. So they had to focus on, getting the ball to Dalvin Cook. TJ Hawkinson was definitely getting a bulk amount of targets in that game from Kirk Cousins. And then you had other guys. KJ Osborne stepped up. You had Adam Thielen here and there make some plays. But it was just the consistency. And then, if you look at the fourth quarter specifically, the Vikings outscored the Bills 13-3 in that quarter. And that was despite the fact that the Bills were relatively winning the game in large stretches through the first 3 quarters. And it's really kind of been one thing that I've honed in on with the Vikings this year. They just know how to play in the fourth quarter. And like I said, this game was no exception. So, when I look at the Vikings now, they're sitting at an 8-1 record. They're right alongside the Eagles as far as the top spot in the NFC. And if the Eagles were to lose on Monday night, there's a very good chance that the Vikings could arguably be the best team in the NFL. You could definitely make a case for it. And just to kind of focus on the Vikings a little bit more, maybe with Kirk Cousins here, thank God this was not a primetime game. Because when it comes to Kirk Cousins in primetime games, he's atrocious. There's no other way to say it. The record speaks for itself. And there are whole YouTube highlight reels. I really shouldn't even say highlight reels. They're more like low light reels when it comes to Kirk Cousins in primetime games. This wasn't a primetime game. This was a 1 o'clock game. And despite the fact that he had some turnovers early in the game, he was able to bounce back and put the Vikings in position to be able to score points. And against a team like the Bills, I got to give him respect for that. And for him to lead that overtime drive to at least get some points on the board, it's better than nothing. Because in years past, Kirk Cousins might have made an errant pass that could have gotten picked off, and then it would have given the opposing team a short field to work with to possibly win the game. That didn't happen. And Kirk Cousins was able to lead that Vikings offense effectively in that overtime period to be able to at least get some points on the board and then hope that the defense steps up and made a play. And that's exactly what they did. So, all in all, when it comes to the Vikings, I give them a tremendous amount of credit for being able to go on the road against what I would consider were sizable odds, because I don't think a lot of teams would have went into Buffalo like that, especially after Buffalo had just lost the week previously and won that game in the manner that they did. And, for them to come back the way that they did and put up 33 points against that really solid Bills defense, I got to give a tip of the cap to the Vikings. They're running away with the NFC North right now. And as far as I see it, you could make a legitimate case that the Vikings are the best team in the NFC at this point. And really, if you really wanted to go to a larger extent, you could say that they are the best team in the NFL. But I would still kind of give that to the Eagles at this point, just because the Eagles haven't lost a game yet. But I got to say, congrats to the Vikings on a phenomenal win. This is definitely the game of the year as far as I've seen it. There have been some other games. That Chiefs and the Bills game was definitely one. I'd have to say even the Cowboys and the Packers game, this game we'll get to later, would definitely be in that discussion as well. But overall, the Vikings are just a solid team. And maybe I'm kind of undercharacterizing them in that fashion. They're a really good team. They need to be respected. And as far as I see it, they play a full 60 minutes. They do not take their foot off the pedal. There may be times where they look inconsistent and they're just not executing as well as they should. But in that fourth quarter, if you're an opposing team going up against the Vikings, you got to play them the whole 60 minutes, because they've really honed in on that fourth quarter and the second half to a larger extent this year. And they're winning those one possession games this year compared to years past where they were falling short. So this is a team to be reckoned with. And as far as I see it, I mean, I think we put out a like a YouTube short and a TikTok a couple of weeks ago saying whether or not that the Vikings were a dark horse team for being a Super Bowl contender this year. I think you have to definitely consider them in that conversation at this point, just because they're 8-1. They beat one of the best teams in the AFC, and we'll see whether or not that they can continue that success for the rest of the year, because they still got some really competitive games down the stretch, and we'll see whether or not that they could not only meet expectations, but if they can exceed expectations. So, like I said, congrats to the Vikings. Great win against the Bills.